they're producing the resentment and fear. The resentments and fear aren't happening from outside. They're actually being produced by where you're looking at life from. When you're obsessed with this sense of self, you're afraid you're not going to get what you want or lose what you have. And you're going to be surveying your life and seeing what could possibly threaten your agenda. Yes? There isn't like 1,000 resentments out there. You produce the view of a resentment. You produce the threat by your perception. Yeah? There's not a place, you can't drive 5 blocks and go to fear. Fear is provoked by how you're looking at life. Yeah? So this is why it says in the big book of AA, the steps are to deflate the ego. Because in a sense, the ego would be like that balloon. When the air of self-importance is removed, the ego deflates to a right size, and then things look a lot different. Yeah? Because it's all based on perception. It's all based on false evidence appearing real. Yeah? That's the fear. Okay, so then, this is to me one of the most important statements of the book. It says, the 3rd paragraph, we did exactly the same thing with our lives. We took stock honestly. First, we searched out the flaws in our makeup which caused our failure. And this is it, being convinced that self. So convinced means to believe with certainty. And self is that image that the mind has of you. Yeah? Being convinced that self, manifested in various ways, is what has defeated us. We will now look at its, meaning self's, common manifestations. Yeah? This is an important statement. It says, being convinced that self, manifested in a lot of ways, so it's through the manifestation of self that we're defeated, right? Has defeated us. So he's separating the two. What I'm saying is, if you go in a room and you ask, what self defeated you, everyone would have the same answer. And it would be myself. Everyone would say, myself defeated me. Myself defeated me. It's not self that defeats us. It's the identification as self that opens us up to its defeat. It's the identification as self that opens us up to its defeat. If we're not that, we can be free of its effects. Yeah? How can self manifest so much in our life? It goes into our relationships. It goes into our ambition for financial security. It goes into our family relationships. How come it's splattering all its effects throughout our life? Because every time it comes into an aspect of our life and it knocks on the door, when we open it up, we recognize it as us. It has carte blanche access to life. So basically, self is now expressing itself through us by identification as it. Yeah? And now it says, okay, being convinced that self manifested in various ways is what has defeated us. We're now going to look at its self's common manifestations. The next paragraph starts out with the word resentment. So if you look at it this way, resentment is an expression or manifestation of self in one's life. Yeah? If you want to get rid of the resentment, get rid of where it comes from. It doesn't come from outside circumstances. It comes from self. Yeah? How is it getting... So what we're suffering from are the manifestations of self. And when people share about the manifestations of self, they usually claim it to be theirs, their manifestations. They go, these are my resentments, my fears. How are you going to be free from the disease if you keep claiming to be the doer of the disease? You've got to have the recognition that what's expressing through you isn't you. Yeah? If we're constantly claiming the expressions of self as mine, that is being in the root cause of the problem. That is being identified as a self. If you weren't identified as self, you wouldn't claim the manifestations of self as yours. You would call them something else. You would call them fear, not my fear. You would call them resentment, not my resentment. Yeah? We're talking from the problem about the solution. That's why there's no solution. If I keep if while I'm talking about the solution, I'm exhibiting the activity of the problem, there ain't much help for me really. I mean, not radically. I'm not radically going to be freed from the bondage of self if I keep expressing or claiming the expressions of self as mine. I have to get to a point where I hold the idea that this is like a foreign installment. It's like a parasitical movement that has attached itself to what is called living, and now it's called my life, but it's not even mine. It's been fucking hijacked. My life is the living of it. The way this life is to a parasite is the interpretation of it. My life is living. Its life is interpreting. It's totally a different way to go. Living is spontaneous, immediate, it's engaging. Interpreting is aloofness, it's separateness, yes? It's observing. In other words, it's like, instead of being in the game, the football game, and your attention is listening to Howard Cosell comment about the game. And its comment is bias. It's not objectively what's happening. It's a biased take on what's going on. We're living an interpretation instead of living life. Yeah? We have been taken over. Life has been made into a still life. It's like stillborn. We know it before it even happens. Oh, I know what it's going to be like when I go down to Crani today. I know. I mean, how dry do you want life to be? And if it's that dry, you're going to be driven for some fucking relief. This is it. Now, in my community, I've never heard anyone express the inventory process as looking at the expressions of self in our life. I always hear it as we're going to look at our resentments, our fears, our harming people. Okay? Maybe we can't make that leap. So let's call them ours, yes? Let's totally say these are my fears and my resentments and my harming others. But if you actually totally take them on, they'll be seen not to be yours eventually. You'll have a true release from it. If you're trying to disavow them as yours, maybe it's best to sort of claim them totally as yours, because I'm telling you, inherently, they are not yours. They are self's. It is a foreign installment. He says it very clearly, self and us. He separates the two. And there's no way, I swear, you take 800 people who are in recovery and you ask, and they have a basic understanding of self, and you ask them what self defeated them, they would say my. The act of being identified with or the claiming of is the activity of the disease. That's the activity. That's where the freedom lies, is the my. Then life is happening instead of to me. Yeah? Then the body is the body instead of my body. Then feelings are just feelings instead of my feelings. Stories are written all day when they're my feelings. Feelings are felt when they're feelings. As soon as they're my feelings, the whole point is not to feel them. To fucking make a story about them. To send them up into the mental realm. Yeah? It's just like a giant rip-off, a heist. And so we become afraid of living. And we seek shelter in this false security of knowing, you know? We live in the mind. We live in a safe space of interpretation, but it's draining the life out of us. Yeah? We're like vertical coffins.